Hey, what's up? This is Blake Wesley, and you're listening to The Briefcase with Casey Holdall.
Greetings, Trailblazer fans, and welcome to The Briefcase presented by Sprint Mountain Casino. Episode 195 of The Briefcase presented by Sprint Mountain Casino, yet another road edition of The Briefcase here in Atlanta. I am your host, Casey Holdall, and the Trailblazers got a 5-game road trip off to a 1-2 start. They won the first game of the trip versus the Bulls in Chicago, but then followed that up with back-to-back losses to the Hornets and the Hawks. We'll talk about those games, and we'll look forward to the Western Conference portion of this trip, which finishes off in Memphis and Houston on this edition of The Briefcase presented by Sprint Mountain Casino. Well, after finishing up a stretch where I think they played 7 of 10 games at home, losing the last game of that stand versus the Timberwolves in a game that I thought the Blazers actually played pretty well in. I think I mentioned on the podcast with Brooke that, of the 3 most recent games the Blazers had had at that point since the All-Star break, they had the blowout loss to the Nuggets, then they had the win versus a shorthanded Suns team, and then I think they had a 3-point loss to the Timberwolves that were, for the most part, had all their players available. I felt like the Blazers played the best in that game versus the Timberwolves, and that was the game that I feel like gave me the most optimism going into this trip. So when the Blazers started that trip out by getting a 121-112 victory versus the Bulls in Chicago, I think you felt pretty good about what you saw from the Trailblazers in that game. Now, the Bulls, definitely a team that are looking towards future seasons, but the Trailblazers coming into that one and playing well. They start out that 5-game trip with that victory in front of a crowd of 18,516 Thursday night at United Center. Always great crowds in Chicago, a great building, obviously a fantastic city, and a really good turnout for that game, regardless of what the Bulls' record is. I think at that point in time, they had lost maybe 10 straight games. Still a very full arena, so shout out to the folks in Chicago for supporting that team, or at least coming out to games for that team, even if the team isn't necessarily winning as much as they would like. That win moved the Trailblazers to 29-31 overall and 13-16 on the road, and it also moved them up into 9th place in the Western Conference standings, 2.5 games behind the Golden State Warriors at that point in time with 22 games to play. The Blazers missing Deni Avdija. Low back injury management for Deni, has not played yet on this trip. He was listed as out versus Chicago, then doubtful, then out versus the Hornets, and then just straight up out versus the Hawks. Not sure if he's going to play at any point in time on this trip, though Tiago did say after the loss to the Hawks that Deni was getting close, so perhaps we will see him at some point in time on this trip, but he was not available for the first 3 games, including the game with the Bulls, nor was Donovan Clingan, who was a late scratch with illness. There is some kind of illness that is going around the team right now. Donovan had it, looked miserable, got better, but is still not necessarily back to 100%. Sidy Cissoko has been dealing with it. Kris Murray only played 4 minutes in the loss to the Hawks, also dealing with it as well. Not entirely sure who's going to get it next. I'm hoping it's not me, but it does seem like it's going around the team right now, which already making things a little more difficult for the Trailblazers while they're on the road. So they were without all those players versus the Bulls, but luckily Robert Williams III was more than ready to play in that game. A fantastic night for Robert Williams, 14 points, 14 rebounds, 4 blocks, 2 steals, and an assist in 23 minutes. Behind the play of Robert Williams and Jeremy Grant, who led all scorers with 27 points on 6 of 10 shooting from the field, 2 of 4 shooting from 3, and 12 of 14 shooting from the line. The Blazers managed to hold off a late rally from the Bulls to start that 5-game trip with a double-digit victory. In that game, Toumani Camara was 16 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 steals in 36 minutes. V. Krejci, 14 points on 5 of 10 shooting from the field, 3 of 8 shooting from 3 to go with 3 rebounds, 2 assists in 28 minutes off the bench. Scoot Henderson also getting his first start of the season in that game, goes 6 of 12 from the field for 12 points, along with 4 assists, 3 steals. Drew Holiday, Kris Murray, Blake Wesley all into that game with 10 points apiece. So the Trailblazers get the trip off to a pretty good start versus the Chicago Bulls. Again, a team that is struggling a bit, but the other teams on this road trip, or at least the Hornets and the Hawks, teams that are around the Trailblazers in the standings, so you have a good performance versus the Bulls, and you feel pretty good about your chances going into the games versus the Hornets and the Hawks. Unfortunately, neither one of those games turning out the way you would like for the Trailblazers. Blazers have an early 1 p.m. local time, 10 a.m. Portland time loss to the Charlotte Hornets on Saturday, 109-93 in that game on Saturday morning. We usually have one game a year, and it's usually on the East Coast that starts around 11 noon Portland time. I don't feel like I can ever remember a game starting at 10 o'clock Portland time outside of the playoffs and particularly on a Saturday. Usually those games are on Sunday, and usually, again, like it's like a 3 p.m. local time, noon Portland time, maybe even a 2 p.m. local time. But for a game to start at 1 o'clock, and for reasons that best I can tell, there were none other than they maybe just wanted to have it be family friendly, but it's just as family friendly at 3 o'clock as it is at 1 o'clock. And as far as I can tell, there were not any other events going on in Charlotte at that time that would cause that game to be at 1 o'clock. And just like I feel like it's not necessarily fair for teams in different time zones to play at 8 o'clock on the West Coast. So say the Minnesota Timberwolves, they're 2 hours ahead of Minnesota. It is not fair to make the Timberwolves play an 8 o'clock game that is a 10 o'clock local or 10 o'clock start in Minneapolis for that team. The opposite is true as well. It is not fair for a West Coast team to have to play a game that starts at 10 a.m. or their time that they would come from. So Portland time, 1 p.m. local time, particularly at the start of a trip. If that game was, the fourth or fifth game of the trip, it's still not great, but at least you're maybe a little acclimated to it. That game being the second game of the trip after playing a game in Chicago that is only 2 hours ahead definitely did not put the Trailblazers on the right footing. Now, granted, they should have had a better performance than they had, but nevertheless, starting out a game in that kind of situation is going to make it difficult, as it was for the Trailblazers. They lose that game 109-93 Saturday morning. Blazers missed, I think, their first 15 three-point attempts. They did end up shooting 11 of 47 from three for the game, but missing that many attempts to start a game, not going to get it done for the Trailblazers. And the Trailblazers, I know that you look at Portland's percentage. I think they're 30th in three-point percentage this year. And I can understand the inclination to say, like, well, hey, wait, if we're a bad three-point shooting team, why are we shooting three-pointers? And my response to that is that the math for this Trailblazer team doesn't really work unless they're hitting three-pointers, because they don't necessarily have the half-court offense you need in order to thrive otherwise. And so while it might not necessarily be the best situation, it's one of the situations that I still think makes the most sense for this Trailblazers team, even when they're missing shots. Now, granted, missing whatever it was, they missed all 10 of their three-point attempts in the first quarter. And I think they missed their first 14 or 15 attempts. So that is never going to get it done. And you're never going to feel good about your three-point shooting in a game like that. Blazers only had 3 fewer field goals in that game. And this is the math that I'm talking about, but the Hornets outscored the Blazers by 15 at the three-point line, and that was the difference in that game. The Trailblazers, again, I think they had the same number of turnovers. They did lose the rebounding battle significantly, I think also by 16 rebounds, so that's not great, particularly for a Trailblazers team that typically does well on the boards and was playing against a Hornets team that doesn't have a ton of size in the middle. Now, granted, Donovan Clingan, he did play in that game, but still not feeling very good. But you would imagine you would do better on the rebounding angle versus a Hornets team. Trailblazers didn't. But all that to say is that the Blazers, again, they only had 3 fewer field goals, and they lost that game by 16 points. Differential at the three-point line, that's your game right there, which is why, even though the Blazers have not been necessarily a great three-point shooting team percentage-wise, they're still taking them, because that's the way that they have to win games. Like, they can't just do as well as the opposing team from 2 and then not take as many threes. They got to take and hopefully make some of those threes, because otherwise they're always going to have a difficult time. I mean, they're going to have a difficult time regardless, particularly with both Deni Avdija and Shaedon Sharpe out, which is why, I don't want to be too hard on the team, because, they're missing their 2 best scorers. That's 50 points right there that you're trying to make up. And that's difficult for any team to do, particularly a team that has a lot of young players, a lot of guys who've been in and out of the lineup due to injuries. So you understand having a difficult time scoring. Unfortunately, you'd really not have it. You prefer it not be that bad, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And you can't go 0 of 10 from 3 in the first quarter and expect to have any chance to win that game. And unfortunately, the Trailblazers did not. In that game, Jrue Holiday with 25 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists in 33 minutes. Jeremy Grant with 21 points of 9 of 6, 18 shooting from the field, 3 of 9 shooting from 3. Didn't get any free throws in that game, which, one of the ways that Blazers can have success if they're not hitting threes is by getting to the free throw line. Jeremy did a great job of that versus the Bulls, did not get a single free throw attempt versus the Charlotte Hornets. Charlotte Hornets didn't get called for a foul in that game in the first quarter, I think, until like 30 seconds left, which again, not a whole lot going right for the Trailblazers in that one. They didn't put themselves on a very good footing in that game, but they definitely didn't get any favors done for them either. Jeremy also had 2 assists, a rebound, and a block in 32 minutes. Toumani Camara, the only other player for the Trailblazers, hitting double figures, 12 points, 6 rebounds, and 2 assists for Toumani Camara. So the Trailblazers played that early game, 1 o'clock start time in Charlotte, head directly to Atlanta after the game. Hit a ton of traffic in Atlanta. Traffic is always bad in Atlanta, but it's been particularly bad this weekend. I guess there's a marathon here this weekend that I guess is a big deal, both in Atlanta and I think nationally. I think it's like a qualifying marathon, and because of that, it took us forever to get from the airport to the hotel in Atlanta on a Saturday afternoon, about a 2-hour drive, and it's not even all that far away from the airport here in Atlanta. That's just the way it goes. And then again, not the reason why the Blazers lost, because it was an early game. But it was a back-to-back. So the Trailblazers, you would hope, would be able to bounce back versus the Atlanta Hawks, a team that is also playing really good basketball right now. Both the Hornets and the Hawks, teams that are probably better right now than their records would indicate, though both those records are actually not all that bad. So you would hope the Trailblazers would come out and at least have a better performance, if not a victory versus the Hawks. But once again, that was not the case. Trailblazers end up losing to the Hawks Saturday night, 135-101 at State Farm Arena is what I think they're calling it these days. Great turnout for the Hawks. I was getting coffee this morning, and I had a couple people. I was wearing my Trailblazer t-shirt because I just got done with a run, and they were like, "Hey, you going to games tonight?" I was like, "Yeah, I was." And there was like 3 or 4 people that were like, "Yeah, we're all going to the game. We're really excited about this team, or we at least want to see what they look like going forward now that they've made some moves." And great fan support here in Atlanta as well. So shout out to the folks who were at State Farm Arena on Sunday night. Fortunately, the Trailblazers not able to make much of a game out of that. They gave up 44 points in the first quarter. 44 points for the Atlanta Hawks in the first quarter of that game. The most points I believe the Trailblazers have given up in any quarter this year, on 65% shooting from the field and 46% shooting from 3. And at that point in time, game's basically over. It never at any point in time did it really feel like the Blazers were getting back into that game. They never got closer than 15 after that first quarter. And again, just never really even seemed like that was a likelihood. Like there were no extended runs. Quinn Snyder, obviously, they wanted to get that victory. So, they did what they needed to do. They called timeouts anytime. I think the Blazers had like 3 consecutive buckets. They would call a timeout to cool it out, which, smart decision by Quinn Snyder. And the Hawks have a lot of talent. On the pregame show, I was talking about it, and you kind of run down the list of players that they have. And, they trade Trae Young, and I think the assumption is that, they're kind of looking to future seasons, but they've got talent on that team. Obviously, they got CJ McCollum now, Corey Kispert, that they got. Both those guys that got in that trade, very good players. Jalen Johnson, one of the best young players in the NBA, and every game that Deni has to sit out because of injury improves Jalen Johnson's chances of winning Most Improved Player. It's definitely a 2-man race. And then you got guys like Dyson Daniels. You basically have solid talent up and down that roster, and a team that, when I look at their team, like it doesn't feel like they're that many pieces away from being a very competitive team. And they're competitive now as it is. And unfortunately for the Trailblazers, just not able to match that competitiveness, didn't match their energy. Chris Murray got the start, only played 4 minutes because he's sick. Sidy was almost a late scratch, did end up playing in that game. Donovan Clingan still not feeling very well, but he's played and started in that game. Tiago had mentioned, he's like, "Hey, it's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. I'm not excusing it." We're pretty tired right now. This team, even after the All-Star break, they've played, I think, 5 or 6 games now over the course of, I think, 8 or 9 days. Back-to-back, a lot of travel. You should have a better performance than they had versus the Hawks on Sunday. But again, just like the game in Charlotte, they should have played better, but they had a fair amount of things that were going against them in that one. The Blazers did shoot better from 3 in that game. But again, when you give up 44 points in the first quarter, you don't really give yourself much of a fighting chance. And as I mentioned, they only got to within 15 a couple times, and it grew to as many as 34 in the fourth quarter as Tiago Splitter rightly started to wave the white flag with about 6 minutes to play in that game. So the Trailblazers falling to 1-2 on this road trip. Drew Holiday 8 of 16 from the field for 23 points, go with 6 rebounds, 4 assists in 28 minutes. Donovan Clingan with a double-double, 15 points, 15 rebounds. So I think Donovan only shot like 5 of 13 from the field, while also handing out a team-high 5 assists. That is great for Donovan to hand out 5 assists. But if your 7-2 center is leading your team in assists, something probably didn't go the way you wanted it to go. And I would say that that would be an apt description of how that game went for the Portland Trail Blazers. Vit Krejci, in his return to Atlanta, posted 14 points on 4 of 5 shooting from the field, 2 of 3 shooting from 3, 4 of 6 shooting from the line. A great response to Vit Krejci's return to Atlanta. Nice little video they played for him. Great crowd support for Vit. I was really happy to see it. Blake Wesley with 12 points in 19 minutes. Scoot Henderson finished with 11 points in 24 minutes back in his old hometown as well. Technically Marietta, but it's close enough to Atlanta to say this is Scoot's hometown. So as I mentioned, Trailblazers go 1-2 to start the 3-game trip with 2 games remaining versus the Grizzlies and the Rockets. Well, another thing that happened in Charlotte is they're remodeling the hotel the team stays at in Charlotte. I think it's the only hotel I've ever stayed at in Charlotte. It's very close to the arena, so that makes it nice, but they are remodeling right now. And the other issue is there's a club that's like across the street from the hotel. And if you happen to be on a floor that's kind of similar to the floor of that club, and we're there on a Saturday or Friday night, can get fairly loud in your hotel room. I believe they put the players on the other side of the hotel, so that way they're not bothered by the noise. But for people like myself, we get put on that side of the hotel, so it can be a little bit difficult to get to sleep sometimes, and particularly when you're playing a 1 p.m. game, a 10 a.m. start in Portland, that can be difficult. But the place you will not have to worry about getting woken up is at Spirit Mountain, because they have a variety of rooms from lavish premium suites to the charming classic standards. The hotel at Spirit Mountain Casino has a type of room for everybody. Their rooms have all the essentials from high-speed Wi-Fi to 24-hour front desk service. Choose the room that best suits you and book your stay now at Spirit Mountain Casino, Highway 18 in Grand Ronde. Elevate your game. Well, since they went 1-2 in the first 3 games of the trip, they'll have to win both of the remaining games on this trip in order to finish better than 500, which was the goal of this team going into this trip. It's basically the goal of every team to go better than 500 on a road trip, but multiple players talked about winning the road trip, and winning that trip means getting a better than 500 record. And if the Trailblazers, as I mentioned, are going to do that, they're going to have to beat both the Memphis Grizzlies on Wednesday and the Houston Rockets on Friday before heading back to Portland to face the Indiana Pacers on Sunday. And the Grizzlies announced today that multiple players are going to be out for an extended period of time. Brandon Clark, I think he's going to get reevaluated in a couple weeks. Zach Edey is having surgery, and he's going to be out, if not for the rest of the season, at least for the game versus the Portland Trailblazers. That is a Grizzlies team that, while they are not rounding into form necessarily, they have won their last couple games, beating both the Pacers and the Mavericks in back-to-back games, and they will face the Timberwolves before hosting the Trailblazers on Wednesday. Trailblazers having Monday off after a back-to-back. We're going to stay here in Atlanta, and then I think we're also going to stay here in Atlanta for Tuesday. They're going to have a practice before heading out to Memphis to face the Grizzlies Wednesday night in Memphis, and then a day off, and then heading to Houston to face the Rockets Friday before heading back home. So 2 games that definitely the Blazers are going to have to play their best in order to get, particularly the game versus the Rockets. Rockets have been a very good team this year. They've had fits and starts. They've been up and down, but generally seem like they're starting to get them things figured out. And the Grizzlies are, while they might have made some moves to, again, maybe prioritize their future rather than their present, you know, they still have talent on that team, and they're still a team, particularly after losing back-to-back games in Portland, that I'm sure are going to be motivated for that game Wednesday night in Memphis. So Trailblazers will need to play their best in order to get that one, and then they'll have to play their best and then some, and hopefully get some players back in order to beat the Rockets in Houston on Friday. If they're able to do that and get to 3-2 on this trip, then I think you feel really good about what they were able to do on this trip, even if they weren't necessarily able to put their best foot forward in losses to the Hornets and the Hawks. But if they don't win both those games, well, I think you at least got to split the last 2 games of the trip to feel at all good about this trip. You'd feel a whole lot better about it if you get both games. As I mentioned, it does sound like perhaps Deni Avdija back in the lineup before we come back to Portland as I mentioned, Tiago Splitter in his comments after the game versus the Hawks mentioned that Deni was getting close to returning. As I mentioned, he was listed as doubtful for the game versus the Hornets, didn't end up playing in that game, and then was listed as out for the game versus the Hawks. But that would at least give you the impression that he has improved, or at least they've seen some things recently that have made them feel like he is on the mend and potentially could get back into the lineup. And, that obviously helps his team immensely if they're able to get Deni on both sides of the ball. I mean, again, getting Drew and Scoot and Blake and Matisse back has been very helpful, but none of those guys necessarily able to give you what Deni Avdija gives you this season. He's an all-star. Any team that loses their all-star player is going to endure some hardships, and the Trailblazers have absolutely done that since Deni's been out of the lineup. So one, you hope he's going to be healthy because you really can't have Deni in and out of the lineup in this last month and a half of the season dealing with that back injury if you're going to have any chance of making any kind of run. So they definitely need to get that squared away. But hopefully once he is able to come back, hopefully it won't be too awful long. Then at that point in time, you got Drew, you got Scoot, you got Blake, you got Matisse, you got Rob, who's really rounding into form, not playing back-to-backs, but still looking very good when he's playing. And so, again, a chance to kind of put some things together and maybe go on a little bit of a run here in the month of March. But they're going to have to play better basketball than they played really at any point in time on this trip. I mean, the Bulls game, they won, and they won it going away. But, the Bulls did make some inroads late in that game that you wouldn't necessarily have expected them to. So there was that. And then, again, just more competitive versus the Hornets. The Blazers did shake off a tough start and at least put themselves in position at points in time to at least have a chance in that game. Was not the case versus the Hawks. At no point in time after the first quarter were they going to win that game. So that's not great. So you feel like you're almost kind of backsliding a little bit, which, again, when you're losing players and guys are sick and you're on the road and it's back-to-back and you spend a lot of time traveling and the game's at 10 o'clock Portland time for some reason, again, those aren't excuses. You still should perform better than the Blazers have in their last couple games, but it doesn't help. Let me put it that way. So the Trailblazers are able to go in and get that game versus the Grizzlies, hopefully maybe getting some guys back. Then you go into that Friday night game versus the Hornets, versus the Rockets. And at that point in time, who's to say what happens if you can get that one? Again, then you go from feeling like, boy, what's going on with this team right now, to being like, hey, we're starting to put some things together here a little bit. So, but they'll have to go out and perform in order to do that, and they're going to have to play much better, particularly versus the Rockets, than they've played versus the Hornets or the Hawks in order to get that win. Hopefully, again, getting healthy, but you can't just rely on health as well. They have to play better. They have to get off to better starts too. So their starts have been not great as of late, and energy should not be like that. Energy should be non-negotiable. Like, if nothing else, a team like the Blazers should be bringing the right energy to start games. And it just seems like, for whatever reason, they haven't necessarily had that pop early in games that I think they need to have. I don't know if they need to maybe kind of drill some things down and just simplify some things early on in games. I don't know if they need to start subbing guys faster. I don't know what it is, but either way, they got to get it figured out, because you can't put yourself behind the eight ball like the Blazers have recently early on in games and expect to be able to win. And Tamani even mentioned that to me after the game versus the Hawks is, they're a team that feels like they can come back and win in games, and that's great. But you can't consistently put yourself in that position where you have to come back in games, because it takes a lot of energy, particularly when you're on the road. You don't have the crowd behind you. You've been traveling. You're not sleeping in your own bed. Time changes. That is not an instance where you're going to be at your best if you're having to try to get back into a game when you're trailing by 10, 15 points before the start of the second quarter. So Blazers got to get off to better starts. They got to get healthy. And they got to bring more energy early on in games. And it also wouldn't help if they start hitting some three-pointers as well. Maybe taking some that they necessarily shouldn't be taking, or at least maybe trying to get some better looks, because, again, when you're a team like the Blazers that hasn't shot necessarily a good percentage, that doesn't mean you should stop taking them, because, again, they need those points. And, there's the old, shooting, I think, 30% from three is like shooting 50% from two, because obviously you get twice as many points for a three as for a two. So, They need to figure that out. But either way, Trailblazers with a chance to still, I won't say salvage the trip, because it's not like it's been a terrible trip. They just had 2 very bad games back to back, and that can make it feel like they're playing worse than they are. So you got to move on. Trailblazers will have a practice, as I mentioned, in Atlanta on Tuesday. Hopefully a chance at that point in time to get some things figured out. Hopefully get some guys back in the lineup. Hopefully maybe, get some of those rotations figured out. Kind of get some of those units maybe a little more comfortable with each other, because that's what this team is going to need going forward, not only just for this trip, but for the rest of the season going forward. And that's going to do it for this edition of The Briefcase. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, more editions as this road trip continues. Probably in Houston, but not sure, entirely sure just yet. But either way, more podcasts coming up, both the Blazers Balcony with Brooke Olzendam and the Briefcase, which you have been watching right now. So for myself, for Spirit Mountain Casino, thank you so much for joining me. Please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Casey Holdall. Go Blazers.